Hey, I'm John,
And I'm Josh.
and this is Dungeon Brew, where we talk about all things homebrew.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Let's talk about storytelling. I am curious, John, when you are beginning to create a new campaign, homebrewing it, where do you start in that storytelling process to kind of create something that's going to keep your characters engaged?
So this kind of varies. There are some campaigns that I attack with a very specific thing in mind. So our current campaign, obviously, with Cast Down from Haven, there's an obvious plot. There are themes of divinity, immortality, responsibility, what heroes are. All of those things go in there. There's obviously specific villains and that type of thing you're supposed to go after. And with that type of thing, sometimes it's like I have this really good idea for a story, and that's where I go. Other times, I have an idea for a setting. I have an idea for a world that I want to explore. And in those cases, I try to let the players tell me what they're interested in. And I do that by kind of creating an initial dungeon that establishes what the world feels like, what the world, what the experience is supposed to be for the characters. So we when we did the Beck Me campaign, I started you guys with the Red Box Basic Edition, Misdemeanor, where you guys went through and you did that dungeon. Through that dungeon, you guys had a bunch of breadcrumbs that I kind of laid out for you that let me know what you guys were interested in as players, as characters, and then I would build out from those. So you guys were interested in what was going on with Bargle. You guys were interested in pursuing your own goals in terms of like establishing keeps or other things like that. Some of you had religious affiliations. All of those things are things that I go, okay, I know that this character is, driven in this way. This is what their motivations are. And so I try to build out from those in order to build the story in a way that's kind of organic to the world that they find themselves existing in.
So I know that you and I are both big world creators. Like, we really enjoy that. And it sounds like there's
Yeah.
a lot of moving pieces that you put into it when you're doing it, whether it's the NPCs or the culture, the politics, the enemy that you're creating for that. And I'm just curious if there's a way that you keep track of that then, because it sounds like you're coming at it from like a multifaceted view to put together lots of different elements all at once to kind of make the world feel full the moment that the characters are stepping into it to kind of garner their interest.
Yes and no. It's one of those things where I build enough that I feel like if there's a question that comes up, that I have an answer for it. And like I said, I do kind of a breadcrumb thing. So
Hmm.
I'll have a situation where I will put a piece of information in front of the players. And sometimes the players will grab that piece of information, look at it, go, and throw it back down and do nothing with it. Other times they'll take it and they'll express a great deal of interest in it, and suddenly they want to know more about it, they want to pursue it, whatever. So if they are actually interested in it, then I start building out from there. And I will build a couple of steps ahead in general, even when I just put down the breadcrumb, if I think it's going to be something immediate. Otherwise, I just kind of like leave it there and wait for somebody to say something about it. And a good example of this is when you guys went and explored the Temple of Halav. There
Hmm.
was a journal that you found, and the journal was something that you could not translate at the time. And so when you guys expressed interest in the journal, I went ahead and finished my translation in the background before it was provided to you. And then you guys got the translation, you looked at it, you read it, and you guys didn't do anything with it. So I completed the translation only when you expressed interest in the translation. But since you guys didn't act on the information that was found in that journal, we never did anything else with that plot line. That plot line I could have built out at any point in time, but I didn't spend hours or weeks trying to build out this entire plot line where you guys went and pursued this evil god and his unholy temple that was supposed to be hidden somewhere because you guys just left it be. And that's kind of indicative of how I handle this stuff. Is I have various ideas for things that I want you guys to do. Sometimes you jump on it, and it's like I could have built out that entire plot line if I wanted to, and sometimes you don't. In which case, it's like that's fine. I didn't expend the effort or the time trying to build that out because it wasn't necessary.
So you're looking at subplots here specifically, but when you're sitting down and creating a campaign or homebrewing something from scratch, do you always have a major plot that's kind of already
Yeah,
put together?
uh, kinda. And again, and there's plenty of examples of this. You guys have a tendency, and I say you guys because you play pretty much all my games. You guys have a tendency to ignore what you don't want to play with. So when we did the Scourge of the Arcane, you guys had the entire plot line with this God King in a city that is escaping me because it's been several years. But there was this God King and all this stuff that was going on, and this plague that was central to this huge plot. You guys ignored that for 15 levels before you finally came back and dealt with it. So the plot line existed from the start of the campaign, this overarching plot line that was meant to define everything that was going on. And the plot continued without you. There were things that happened in the background that you guys had no control over and no impact on because you chose to go off and do your own things, which was basically just doing subplots and things like that off in the background.
That's really fascinating to me because, as we mentioned before, you and I are both writers as well. And when I write a book, I always have the main plot, and then I'll build subplots off that will support that main plot. But in the recent Norse campaign that you guys are playing, you haven't even gotten to the main plot.
Right.
The quest has been there for a while, and no one has actually stepped into it to go pursue that quest. But the main plot has been there all along, and you guys have spent the first. What level are you guys on now? 6? You guys have spent the first 6 levels just doing subplots and going from place to place and accomplishing things, and have never gotten to the main plot of the actual campaign.
Which I've done those types of campaigns before, where I've actually built it intentionally to just be side quests. Like, this is a quest, then this is a quest, then this is a quest. These are people who need help. And I found those to be pretty fun because then it's like reading short stories. You know, it's opening up a book of short stories, which some of my favorite tales are short stories. So you can follow the same group of adventurers where they go through and they do short stories. It doesn't have to be a novel. It can be we did these quests, or we did this quest where we did all of these things, and then we moved on to the next one, then the next one, then the next one. Those things work. So it's not, I don't think it's always necessary to have that overarching plot. It doesn't always have to be Lord of the Rings where you have this big bad evil villain that the heroes need to destroy. It can be something else. It can be something less, and it can be just as enjoyable.
Well, and this goes back to my initial question, and what I was looking at is that I feel like there's a formula that you have to put together in order to structure an engaging plot, whether it's big or small, even a subplot, in order to keep the characters interested and continuing to pursue that. Otherwise, your sit-down sessions of playing can become rather dull, and the characters don't really feel motivated to come and play.
Yeah, it's like A plot, B plot. It's pretty common in a lot of sitcoms on television, which is basically the idea that you have your main story, which takes up the majority of the time, and then you have a B plot, and the B plot is sprinkled in order for so the audience doesn't get bored. And in this case, both your characters and your audience are the same people, so having an A plot, having a main campaign, and then sprinkling in your B plot, which are side quests and other things, diversions, that allows your characters and your players to both be engaged in, various things while always having this other thing in the background that they have to deal with. And sometimes it comes to the foreground as they're pursuing it, and then there's a lull. They do a side quest, and then something else comes up, and they go back to the main plot again. So no, that makes a lot of sense, really.
Is it important for you to have those B plots tie into the main plot, or can they be completely helter-skelter, just off the mark and not have anything to do with that main plot?
I think both. I mean, there's no reason why you can't have a diversion in terms of a side quest that takes you somewhere off the main, like off the beaten path. But that's not to say that I don't just ignore, or I try not to, ignore the side quests. Sometimes with those, it's like I'll have a side quest and I'll put that in there, and it's like you guys will go off and do whatever it is that you need to do, and afterwards you'll go back to your main plot. But something about that, whether it's an NPC that you met, it's something that you interacted with, it's something that you accomplished, I will try and bring that back into the players' lives at some point. Because that is, to me, that's closer to reality, not in the sense that we go questing, but it's like when we interact with somebody, when we engage with even minor things in our lives, in some ways those come back and revisit us, whether that's just the impression that we get from it, or it's something along the lines of, we met somebody at the store and then later on we'll meet them again, or something like that. Like it feels like one of those things where you don't have to just have a side quest exist inside of a bubble. That it can go outside of that, even if it didn't originally have anything to do with your main plot.
I really like that response because for me, especially, regardless if the side plot is not tied back in or you have some element that comes back in, it does allow the world to feel bigger and
Right.
more genuine and exciting for players because I feel like they're exploring more. And I think that's the real challenge of homebrewing worlds and stories is having it have that feel where it is immersive. Like you can dive into it and there's so much to explore and so much to do that you can stay there for a really long time and continue to adventure in that world without being pulled out of it. I know when I did the Hawkhurst campaign, I tried to accomplish that because in all, you were in one city. It was one
Right.
location. You weren't traversing a world. You had essentially 3 levels of a city, and all of your campaigns and all of your quests and all of your adventures took place in that city. But I tried to make it feel as though the city was so large and complex, and there were so many different intricacies on how it was put together that you felt like you could adventure there forever, and it continued to hold its intrigue.
I enjoy those. I think that they're fun. I find that for me, the A plot, B plot is almost as much for the players as it is for me as a DM, though. If I just am working on one plot, if I'm just working in one direction the entire time, I find myself getting a little bit tired of it as well. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that you're diversifying some of these aspects of gameplay simply because it does increase enjoyment. It does allow you to take a break from, especially if it's one of those campaigns where you have that epic, Lord of the Rings style bad guy that, is what you're after the entire time. It can get very tedious if you're not trying to break that up a little bit.
Well, I know one thing that I want to talk about in this video is just the initial setup of the storytelling when you're putting it together. And this is something that I kind of do for myself because I also do it when I write. But there's 5 primary things that I try to identify for the story that I want to make sure that I bring out and give to the characters when I'm homebrewing a setting.
Right.
The first one of those is the setting overall. Just have a good couple of sentences about what your setting is. Is it a dark fantasy? Is it a steampunk world? Just something to kind of give the atmosphere of what that world is in a couple of sentences. Second, identify what that major plot is, what you're trying to accomplish. Third, maybe just identify what the main objective might be for the characters. And they're going to come up with their own motivations throughout the story, and that's totally okay. And they may twist the objective on its head, but identifying that. For most fantasy as well, which you can play with this one a little bit, but also identifying the opponent that maybe they're going to be facing. Who is the overall bad guy? And this could be an organization. It could be some evil god. It could be one individual that's, trying to run the land or something, an evil king. Who knows? But figure out who your opponent is. And then one thing that I also like to do is identifying what the climatic moment might be in the story. And you're going to have multiple climatic moments, hopefully, whether it's in a singular battle or a twisting point in the story that you give. But I like to identify what that big climax might be somewhere in the story, so I have something that I'm building towards, where I'm kind of giving breadcrumbs up to that climax because I already have it identified of what I want the characters to experience at some point.
Right, and yeah, having an end goal in mind is helpful. It's the same thing that happens sometimes in storytelling. You can start a story, but if you don't know where the story is leading, then you end up kind of running out of gas at a certain point. And a lot of campaigns end up petering out for that exact reason. They start out full steam ahead, and if the DM doesn't know where the campaign is going, doesn't know what the end of it looks like, then it can easily get to a situation where it's like, okay, well, I'm kind of out of material, or they lose interest, or whatever it is. It can end for that reason. So having that in mind is very useful. Something else that I like that you mentioned was the idea that you have an objective, the objective for the campaign, and you separate that from the villain of the campaign. So those aren't necessarily the same thing. It is not necessary that you have the villain be the objective, kind of a thing. And since we've already talked about Lord of the Rings, I think that's useful to look at it that way. Sauron is the villain, the big overarching one, and then destroying the ring is the objective. So you accomplish one by doing the other, but the objective is separate from the villain. And accomplishing one goal, like if you were to defeat Sauron, the issue is that you haven't completed the objective. Like, that doesn't actually, like, that's the mistake that was made in the past. That's why he didn't go away. So it's helpful to frame those things out, and it's possible to have that bleed over, but separating them and understanding what one is versus the other is going to be very helpful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking about the campaign that we ran recently with Tiamat and you guys going to hell, because you never defeated the opponent, but you did accomplish the objective.
Right.
So it was kind of the twist of the same concept, that one can be done without the other, and it still brought the campaign to a conclusion. Well, that and the overall elimination of the entire party because he decided to fight Bell. But
TPKs do end campaigns sometimes.
Judge and Brew.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us today. Please check out some of the stuff we're doing. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, join us on our Discord, or go and watch us stream on Twitch, where we're at 4 or 5 days a week. All the links are down below. We look forward to hearing from you.
Judge and Brew.
Yeah. I feel like I had a joke in there somewhere, but it's gone now.
I'm sure it was hilarious. All right, so I paused because I don't have an answer to this question. Even though you asked it a minute ago, I was like, I don't really fucking know. Sometimes it's hard.
Judge